Welcome to Cooperative Conversations, the live stream series that connects you with the real stories from Australian primary producers who are working and growing their businesses together in cooperatives. Hi, I'm Pete Lewis, and in one way or another, for the past 25 years, I've been helping Australian farmers tell the really good stories that go into producing food and fibre in this country. Tonight, we have a very good panel of people to kick around some ideas that we started a little earlier when we caught up with Mountain Milk Chairman Stuart Crossway about what it takes to form a cooperative out of adversity and keep it going strong in times of financial pressure, corporate squeezes, and even the odd pandemic. We've heard about sweat equity, the changing face of primary production, which seems the perfect jumpstart into a roundtable about what makes the cooperative model succeed and sometimes why it fails. Joining us with Stuart today are three other agribusiness leaders working with cooperative farming models. We have Sean Cole, the CEO of CCW Co-op, the biggest grape co-op in Australia. Mark Kebbell, who's the Executive Officer for Dairy Farms Australia, their milk co-op. And Melita Morrison, who is the CEO of the Business Council for Cooperatives and Mutuals. Welcome, everybody, and thanks again for your time. Stuart Crossway, thinking about business, the vision is what drives it and gives it its heart and soul. How does this play into the success or failure of the cooperative model?
Well, I think all good plans get tested at times, but I think under a cooperative, you know, theoretically, you're bringing a group of people together as members to form a co-op. It's about, you know, they want to understand a vision, they want to follow a vision, they want some decent plans to follow. So I think it's really important in a co-op to have well laid out plans and a vision and something that people can gravitate towards and understand where their business is heading. I don't think it's any different to any other business, to be honest. Whether you're a co-op or not a co-op, you need to be well planned and well organised.
So how important is it to stick to that vision and that plan, and what happens when things go wrong? How much have you had to adjust your thinking along the way and in the 3 years since you formed Mountain Milk?
Yeah, well, I think when we first got together, our plans have changed a lot. I think we've rewritten our strategic plan. We're coming up to our third version in 3 years. So, you know, it's important that you have the flexibility to adjust and adapt. And I think, you know, in the dairy industry in the last 3 years, it's been a pretty good example of needing to adapt and needing to change and be flexible. So, yeah, over the last couple of years, we've and particularly in the last 6 months, to be honest, we've had to make some big changes, but the plan and the strategy have always underpinned where we've headed and our direction. So I think it's important that you've got that, so you've got a reference point.
Thanks, Stuart. Let's go to you now, Sean, for some insights into your cooperative. As I mentioned at the head of the program, Australia's largest member-owned wine grape cooperative, CCW, in South Australia's Riverland. Briefly, tell us a little bit about what your co-op does.
Yeah, sure, Pete. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, CCW Cooperative Limited is the largest producer and marketer of wine grapes in Australia by volume. We're about 11% of the entire market. So wine market's best kept secret, really. We're fully owned grower cooperative, all grower board except one board member, an independent board member. Our primary activity is pool marketing our members' grapes. We have individual agreements with each individual member. Then we pool that similar to a grain pool or something like that, get the economies of scale and competitive advantage and market those grapes or value add them into wine, be it for bulk or retail, both to the domestic and export markets. In addition to that, we also have a viticultural arm. So as part of the Viti service we have to growers, which is paid for by a levy, we provide world-class advice and help our members increase the profitability of their farms at their own individual micro farm level. And we also have a few other activities we undertake. And most recently, we've gone into vineyard management, which is another revenue stream that helps reduce the cost of running the cooperative and help get larger returns and dividends back to our members.
CCW has been operating for almost 100 years, awful lot of changes in that time, and I guess an incredible concentration of ownership of the big wine brands that we've seen. Do you think your vision has changed with all those changes from the original vision that the co-op started off with?
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. The co-op, I've only been with the co-op for now on just nearly 3 years, but the co-op has gone through many different structures and iterations. It originally began with smallholder growers, as you normally see, how most co-ops start out. It's growers trying to gain advantage through scale, getting together post-World War One and forming a cooperative. And originally they would make fortifieds and deliver their grapes to the winery and get paid 8 years later. So, their payment terms that wouldn't be acceptable in this day and age. But through that, they managed to gain scale, get branding, and make their way into the market. And eventually the cooperative, through many iterations, turned into a much larger organisation, culminating in the formation of a company, Beryl Hardy. And also the cooperative at times owned wineries. Our current structure is that we don't. We make wine elsewhere in toll manufacture. So look, to say the strategy hasn't changed would be a complete lie. But I think given, different economic times call for different economic plans, one thing that does hold true though is there has to be value for membership, and the member has always been treated as a customer and a proposition to the customer in terms of value and how do we put more dollars in the pocket of the member. And I think that's always held true over the last 100 years or so.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember working in South Australia when they had the vine pull scheme, where they're actually paying people to rip grapevines out of the ground. It seems sacrilegious now. And then, of course, as changing tastes, they all went back in.
Absolutely. There's been many market cycles and a lot of turmoil in the industry, and that wouldn't be very, every industry sees it, with Stuart, the dairy industry, and I've worked in that previously. There's always challenges. But, I think the hardest part for any business is anticipating what the future looks like. And given we're in COVID now, that's what we're all trying to work out.
Look, a good time to bring Melina Morrison into the conversation. Farming co-ops have had a presence in this country since the 1850s. Speaking to your general experience across cooperatives, how critical are business plans in the success of those cooperatives?
Thanks, Pete. Well, as Stuart was saying, they're no different to another type of agricultural business in most ways. The business plan is king, and just because you're a co-op doesn't mean you don't need a sustainable business model going forward. And I guess that's really down to, good strategy, good business planning, the right finance, and good management. There is one thing that's really different about a cooperative, though, and that is that it gives the owners, the producers, a genuine voice in the direction of the co-op company, if you like, and that's really through the delegated authority that those owners give to member-elected boards. So their voice is at the board table, and what that means is that the co-op remains focused on returning benefit to the producer. And there's nothing like that focus, sharpening that focus when you're dedicated to try to get the best farm gate returns for your owners, for your members.
We've had a couple of questions come in since we've gone live, and I think this is probably one I guess you could probably all have a crack at. But there used to be loads of co-ops. Why aren't there so many around anymore? Who wants to have a go at that?
Well, I'll jump back in with the data, if you like.
They're very good.
Co-ops have been through cycles of, particularly of demutualisation. Probably the people on the panel might know more than I do about this because you're actually directly involved in agriculture. But we used to have a lot of producer-owned, cooperatively owned food manufacturers. Those great sort of brands that we remember. And they were demutualised, but actually the numbers of co-ops, when they drop out of a particular sector, new ones come up. We've heard that through the story through Stuart. So there are still a good number of agricultural cooperatives, 230 in Australia. Around 24,000 farm businesses are members of these cooperatives, and they employ many more Australians in agriculture.
There you go. Thanks for that question. Now, in terms of success and failure, member engagement is consistently listed as one of the crucial things you need. Dairy Farmers Co-op has 350 members in 4 states. Mark Keble, tell us what your co-op does and how important member engagement is to your success.
Yes, look, thank you, Pete. So, as you mentioned, we are in 4 states, so geographically very diverse, but the common thread, of course, is dairy farming. We were born from the sale of a vertically integrated cooperative, and so we're now a supply cooperative. We're essentially, in many ways, a collective bargaining group. So we give our farmers a seat at the table with the processors, and I've got to say a lot lately is in advocacy, in work with political-driven institutions. The ACCC had an inquiry, we've had Senate inquiries, we've had a whole bunch of stuff, and it's been important for us and our farmers to have a seat at that table too. So look, we're essentially, as I said, a collective bargaining group. When it comes down to it, the big pieces are price and milk purchasing policies. So all the metrics that Stuart, you know well, in dairying that processors impose on farmers. So it's about representation and just giving our guys a seat at the table, making sure that the world is fair. Do you know, I think one of the big things that came out of the ACCC inquiry was this whole notion of the imbalance of power. And really that's what we look to address. It's about making sure that the bigger bodies above us in the supply chain don't get to pull rank and bully.
You're obviously comprised of lots of very rugged individuals. And as you said, you're spread geographically over a fair area. So there's obviously a whole range of influences and factors on them. How do you make it all work when they all get a say and they are spread so far and so wide?
Yes, Pete, look, in the end, the regions are very, very distinct. You know, we have a region, for example, in far north Queensland and the Atherton Tablelands. It really has some really unique farming characteristics, processing characteristics. Scale is an issue. Amazingly, oversupply there is our biggest issue at times. So, and then right down to the Fleurieu Peninsula in South Australia. So very, very different farming conditions. Engagement comes down to, really, I can say, it varies from region to region and year to year. It comes down to the issues that they're facing. You know, if drought's an issue, if water prices are an issue, if milk prices are an issue, if the competition are doing something, you know, it's really heightened when there are big issues to address, and they need a voice. They need some getting together and consolidated thinking and representation, really. So when times are good, I must say that the engagement drops.
Stuart, if we just stayed on dairy just for a moment, you're obviously on a slightly different scale to dairy farmers, but and one of Australia's newest dairy cooperatives. How do you keep the smaller number of members engaged and in the business, and what happens when you know, member engagement is not there and you have disagreements?
Yeah. So we have a board of directors, 5 directors, and we have 8 members in total. So most of our members are represented at the board table. So the handful of people that aren't, it's just a matter of picking up the phone and keeping them informed. So, you know, that's the Mountain Milk Cooperative as it is today. But prior to that, our family and most of the people in our co-op were members of Murray Goulburn, where there were 2,500 members. I think that was a good example of where member engagement and communication had completely evaporated. And a lot of that was due to other reasons. But in a smaller co-op, it's really easy. and I think that's our advantage at the moment. But I think for Mark's co-op and even Sean's and all the other co-ops out there, as you grow, there becomes a real tension around how do you maintain member engagement, and as Milena was saying, how do you maintain member engagement via directors sitting at the table and making sure that they're representing your membership. So I think it's probably one of the key aspects of a co-op, how you maintain that that engagement as you grow. There's a real art to it. Something we've started doing right from the word go was education, making sure our members really understand what a co-op is. I think that's something that might have been lost over the generations and as co-ops have demutualised and so on. But yeah, at every opportunity we try to educate our members about what a co-op is, the competitive advantage they're getting from being part of it.
Sean, in your case, the geographic area is rather small and discrete, but you have almost 600 grower members who produce close to 200,000 tonnes of wine grapes annually. How do you manage to wrangle all these members and keep them engaged and wanted and loved?
Yeah, from our side, Peter, it can feel like herding cats sometimes, but we actually do have a formal media and member engagement strategy, which we ratify at a board level as a trickle-down effect. So we have regular grower events, certain media engagements that we have to make, and it's a bit like any marketing or advertising. There's so many touch points that you want to probably have throughout the year, and obviously they're going to vary based on the topics of the day. So obviously water was a huge one for us. So our marketing program started leaning very heavily towards water and water advice, and having advisory bodies such as AITHA sit in front of our growers and PIRSA and other representatives. So I think it's making sure that you do schedule the time and do it. The content of what you deliver on an annual, quarterly or weekly basis is your choice. And obviously we try and make it as relevant as possible. We are a small team. We're not a multinational with a huge marketing sort of department. So you've got to get creative, but we have the avenues such as Facebook that link into other people's pages as well, and create content and engagement. But we have a fairly mature grower base too. A lot of our members are north of 50 years of age. They do prefer more in-person forums. And back to how we handle engagement with the board, we make sure there's always a very good opportunity to mix physically. Obviously with COVID it's a bit of a challenge, but usually we'd mix physically the members with the board members and have them attend, especially AGMs and other grower events, and grower Christmas parties and things like that are an excellent engagement thing that we need to ramp up as well in future. So we have a pretty coherent plan with a bit of ad hoc in there as well.
Milena Morrison, members are the shareholders of a co-op. Where does this go right, and where does this go terribly wrong?
That's a great question, Pete. I think really it goes wrong, and maybe Stuart explained this better than I will, but it seems to me it goes wrong when you treat members like shareholders of a different type of firm, an investor-owned firm, because that type of company is about dividends. Shareholder in a cooperative sense means a share in the democratic voice or the democratic control of the cooperative, and that's about influence. So you have genuine influence in the cooperative. So we need to think about shareholding in different ways. If it's about returning benefit to producers above all else, then the shareholding that you hold in your cooperative is really about that. It's not about disinterested, distant shareholders who are in their skin in the game. Is about their capital return.
Look, we've had a very interesting question from one of our viewers, and it really touches, I guess, on what we've been talking about most recently. And the question is, when a co-op fails, it's said it's because of the old-fashioned and outdated business model. But when a private shareholder company goes down, nothing's said about its legal structure whatsoever. It's just kind of, do co-ops come in for unfair criticism, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it, Stuart.
Yeah, I think they do. I think they, you know, we have close connections with our communities. They're so embedded within the community, and when it does fail, it's more than just a structure falling over. It's the fabric of that community being sort of torn apart. And I think you saw that with the Murray Goulburn collapse. There were fair income communities that weren't actually, a lot of them weren't dairy farmers, but you know, a lot of the people were employed in processing or connected some way or another to the industry. And so maybe the gravity of the failure is a little bit more far-reaching sometimes. And as Milena was saying, you know, the shareholders are the members, so you know, their wealth and their generations of wealth that have been created has been dismantled. So I think it does have a bit more gravity about
it. A question to Sean, Mark and Stuart. Are there situations where you think it'd be better for the business if you were not part of a co-op?
I think the day you stop caring is probably when you need to remove yourself and you've got nothing else to offer. I mean, obviously, I'm not a board member of our co-op, but I think when you've lost the passion and you've been in the chair for a while and you haven't got any new ideas or anything else to bring, that's probably when your time's up. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with admitting that with yourself as well. If you are in that position, I've seen a lot of directors in my time gracefully leave and contribute for, you know, up to 20 years on a board or a grower board or a co-op board. But yeah, you really need to be passionate about a cooperative. And to Stuart's point, they're more emotional businesses, in my opinion, and that's the trap for co-ops too, because decision making shouldn't be overly emotional. Your members will be, but I think your business plan needs to be very commercial, and you need to realise everyone's trying to take a piece of your market share every moment of the day, and you need to understand that if you're not in front of them, they're in front of you. So yeah, that's probably my feeling in general in business, is make sure you maintain your competitive advantage and reassess that often.
What do you think, Mark?
Do you know, sometimes unilateral decision making is quicker, isn't it? You can be more nimble if you're just sitting at the top, caring not a jot about the shareholders. But if every decision you make has to pass the pub test with the members, it does make you pause. And oftentimes, you know, we've got a board representative with, you know, we've got 5 farmer directors and 1 independent director, but they are all necessarily engaged, and oftentimes they've got to think beyond their own interests for the greater good. It's a really difficult space to be in and make decisions for 300 odd members around different areas. It may be detrimental to their own business oftentimes. So it makes it hard, and you get some compromised decision making, I'd suggest, because of that. Whereas a managing director of a corporation can be, I'd argue, more nimble.
What do you think, Stuart?
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, I think that one of the problems with a co-op is that you potentially have quite a homogenous board of growers, and as Mark was saying, you need to surround yourself with professional help and skills, whether that be independent directors or whatever it is. But I think, yeah, it's a different model. You've got to understand the flaws, not necessarily the flaws, but maybe the weaknesses in that. But I think we all agree that the advantages far outweigh that. Yeah.
Milena, do cooperatives succeed or fail at a different rate than any other business structure?
Well, the evidence is in that actually cooperatives, when they're well managed, when the finance is right, when the governance is right, just like any other business, and factors that aren't out of your control, you know, are not impeding you, like drought, fire, the things that you can't control, that cooperatives are more sustainable. We know that because there are less failures of those that are well run. We certainly know that in terms of cooperative startups, cooperatives, businesses that begin life as a cooperative are 5 times more likely to be around than another type of small business. And there's one reason for that, and that is that you've got more people who have to be involved in the start of the enterprise, who agree to cooperate and have skin in the game. You know, it's rational self-interest. You're not going to jump into a cooperative unless it makes sense to yourself. It's got to be better to be in a co-op than in another business model. It's just got to be rational. So, yeah, they do have to be well run, but they can be highly sustainable. Most co-ops, that they do fail spectacularly at times as well, but most co-ops are demutualised by sometimes hostile, takeovers.
To Mark now, look, to the casual observer, the dairy industry has really been in the headlines over the last 5 years or so for a whole range of reasons. It's obviously an interesting case study as a subset of Australian agriculture in terms of its business structures, and there have been, as we said, several fairly high-profile failures recently. How hard is the game, the dairy business, under any structure in Australia in 2020?
Well, gosh, the 2020 piece is probably the highlight of the question there, isn't it? What our farmers have faced almost across the whole country in the last 12 and 18 months has been extraordinary, with the drought, which was virtually countrywide, as you all know. The fires in New South Wales, the water prices that came on the back of the drought. There's been some well-publicised supermarket battles and what they're doing with dairy and the impact that the big retailers are having. So, increasingly, I think that our members want to have a voice, and that's what we provide. We have a seat at that table. It's that structure that really gives them a feeling when they're up against it that someone has their back. If it's a price negotiation, if it's purely commercial, that's one level. But if it's just having a voice with a politician, if it's just having a seat at the table in an advocacy space, it's super important. So yes, dairy's had a tough time, but times are changing, aren't they, Stuart? It's the seasons are good, prices are good. So let's hope. But yeah.
Stuart, in a publicly listed or proprietary limited company, success is governed by what the balance sheet says. Does the same go for cooperatives, or how else do you value success?
Well, I mean, for our cooperative, we're looking at success as in profit for our members, and as all of you and your audience know, profit has two sides to it. One's the economic income side of it, and the other side is the expenses. So, we have an opportunity here to deal with both sides of the equation. And while we're small, we're agile, and as we get bigger, that'll be a challenge that we have to manage. But you've got it's about creating value and not max. We need to be profitable as a business, but how do we maximize value and what's important to our members? And getting back to your question about member engagement, a lot of your ideas and a lot of your value can stem from their input and their motivations for your business. So, I think from our point of view, we're really, it's an old saying, but we're really trying to farm together and work together as a collective. I don't know too many corporate processing businesses that we could potentially send our milk to that would even communicate like that.
Melina, the cooperative legal structure is a bit of a challenge to implement, but do you think it is important, or can you be a proprietary limited structure and just act cooperatively?
Well, we can all act cooperatively in business or in government or in life. We're seeing a lot of cooperation to do with the pandemic. We saw a lot of cooperation following the bushfires. It's a natural way to respond to crisis. And that's a good thing because together we're stronger. But the difference with a cooperative, I guess, in terms of business cooperation is that it's a legal requirement of the cooperative that you cooperate. It's embedded in your constitution. It's an active membership test, 7 principles of cooperation. And if you walk away from the legal binding agreement you've made as a member with your cooperative, which is expressed in your active membership, then you aren't with the co-op anymore. And you might leave the co-op or you might be asked to leave. So I guess that it's not left to chance in a cooperative. It's part of the business model itself. It's in its DNA.
Got a really interesting question from Steve Barr, who has, and there's quite a bit of support for Steve's question for this one. The co-op model succeeds when expectations of why it exists are strongly aligned. Are there key components that help a co-op succeed for the long term? Who'd like to have a go at that one?
I will. I think any business needs a healthy culture, and we chose the cooperative business structure. We could have chosen a corporate structure. It would have been probably a lot quicker and a lot simpler. But the ingredients that are involved in the co-op structure are, I think, what our members are chasing as farmers and participants in a business. They're the ingredients. They want to be valued. They want to be part of something. They want to be part of the solution. And I think the very fabric of the principles that underpin a co-op are what our members are looking for. They may not necessarily understand them in great detail, but when we listen to them and talk to them, that's what they're chasing.
Sean, it's been a tricky year for many wine producers. You've had fires and the associated smoke taint, locusts, floods, and obviously COVID-19. How has the Riverland fared, and is being part of a cooperative helped or hindered you negotiate those rocky roads?
Well, look, I'm almost embarrassed to say, Pete, the Riverland came out basically unscathed from those events. We did experience the drought, of course, but it has been a rough year for the wine industry, and there'll be a lot of producers doing it tough. It'll be quite marginal in the next 12 months. So I wish them all the best, and I hope everyone gets through. From our side, though, looking at what can happen, be it smoke taint and drought and things like that, the most important thing we do at our co-op is rather than losing sleep over it at night, we have quite a robust framework of crisis and risk management plans that would be engaged if that happens. So it's knowing what exit to run through when there is a fire and who's doing what. So who's driving the bus. So, in life, there's some risks you can't mitigate, and drought is one that's very difficult, obviously. It's having a coherent plan around that and knowing who you reach to and who you network with at those times, and looking inside your own organisation to see how you can help your members remain in the business and profitable. So I think the crisis and risk management plans are essential. And some cooperatives that are smaller will struggle having very detailed plans, and we struggle with resources too. But, if it's a one-pager on who's doing what when it goes wrong, that's better than nothing. And that might just be the difference, making it through the next 12 months in something like we've seen the last 12 months of some producers.
And as we've seen so often, and sadly in recent years, when these events, catastrophic as they often are, whether they're last summer's bushfires or the catastrophic weather event that flattened the beef industry in Queensland's northwest, there is a remarkable ability for particularly small communities to pull together. And I imagine if you are already glued together in a co-op, you are going to really, start a long way ahead of other communities who have got to whip people in and try and get things going. Is that the experience?
Yeah, certainly, Pete. People form tribes. Look at human psychology. It's probably why we have cooperatives. We form tribes of like-minded people. And, when you look at depression and other social issues, our growers have got through them a lot better. And we've actually had members reach out to each other, and it's probably avoided some people doing some silly things they might regret later. So I think that support mechanism is one intangible. You can't quite measure it, but it's definitely very, very valuable in a cooperative. You can't underrate that when times are tough.
Look, we've got another a really interesting question and a good deal of support for this one. Getting a good price at the farm gate makes a lot of sense, but why don't your co-ops add value to the raw product? How do your co-ops manage these decisions that hold both risk and reward? Good question. How do you manage that, Mark?
Look, in many ways, our business model, where we are as a supply cooperative now, is a result really of us saying it got too hard for farmers to manage big brands, big factories around the country, take on the competition, manage the big retailer relationships. At some point, you got our founding directors, or the directors at the time of the sale, said, "Do you know what? Now the time is right. Let's sell up." And so National Foods, Sean, bought ACF. So it's not necessarily the case that it's the right place to be. As it gets bigger, I'd argue it gets harder. Managing big brands is a marketing challenge for the best of them, let alone managing factories and the logistics, et cetera, et cetera. It gets tough. So it sounds romantic, but it's not necessarily the only way. You do what you do well and let someone else do what they do well.
Sean, you mentioned CCW is not in the winery business anymore, although it once was during its evolution. Is that kind of aligned to what Mark is talking about, sticking to your knitting?
Yeah, certainly. I agree with Mark in terms of running big brands. We actually do own a brand. We do add value to some of our product, but we are very particular about how we do that and when we do that. So I think when you look at the global competitiveness of a business and the supply chain, there's a lot of extra investment that goes in with the staff and personnel of, running a brand, be it Big M or whatever it is, or Penfold. So if you're really going to take on big business and go head to head, you need to have a team as good as theirs and connections. And it is totally possible, but it's a huge financial investment, and it takes a long time to build a brand. That's one way. We can buy one, and the second option is difficult for co-ops because often don't have a huge balance sheet unless they draw that from their members. But look, we do add a lot of value through wholesale, and we found our way in wine as a bulk wholesaler, which actually it doesn't sound very romantic, but it's actually quite a nice little value add for our members. So we can do quite a lot of that with a lot less effort than a huge brand portfolio. So there are ways. You've just got to work out the biggest bang for your buck for the least amount of effort, to put it that way, and make sure you play to your strengths.
Stuart, it's very early days for Mountain Milk. You've got the logo, as we can see, over your shoulder. Do you hope that sometime in the future we'll see that logo on products that really identify where it's come from, and particularly that will work on a local and regional level to really tie you into your community? Yeah,
absolutely. We'd love to. Our co-op's small, but they are all family farms. I'm a fifth generation on our family farm. Most of the other people are similar, 3, 4, 5 generations. So, that's a great story in itself. And, we see, as I was saying to you earlier in the night, we see an opportunity to connect, to our community via our product, through the essence of what a co-op is. So can I just go back a little bit to the previous question there? One of the things we've done to try and add value for our members is not necessarily, we want the highest price for our members, but it's how you get paid sometimes. And we've really tried to focus on how can we create an environment for our members that allows them to make the best decisions, the most profitable business decisions for their specific set of assets. And if you really think about that, we're not being pushed around by a set of incentives that are corporates overlaying on top of us. We're free to make decisions that enhance our assets and our investment that we've already made in our business over those generations.
Yeah. Anybody? No, Melina, any thought on that particular proposition?
Well, I think what's really great about the answers is that the destiny of the cooperative is in the hands of the owners, and they decide how value is being added and where in the life cycle of the cooperative the value adding is seen as sitting. There's absolutely no doubt that one of the best ways to value add to farm income is to cooperate. And one thing that cooperatives do is enable scaling. So all over the planet, farm businesses, independent, autonomous, sometimes small family farm businesses come together to scale to value add, access to export markets, advanced food manufacturing, if that's what you're into. So it's very much the destiny that's determined by the owners at the time. And if I just paint one picture for you, just to make sure that we know that co-ops do all sorts of value adding. If you got up this morning and you had an egg and bacon sandwich and you had Danish Crown bacon and you had a glass of Ocean Spray cranberry juice and you used Kerrygold butter, I'm sorry to use all of these global brands, and you put dairy farmers milk on your cereal and you had Norco and Nimbin cheese as a side dish, then you basically ate a cooperative breakfast. So value adding happens in many and various ways in cooperatives.
If you borrowed money, it could be from Rabobank, which is a gigantic Dutch-born specialist rural lender, which grew out of the need to finance farming way back when. If we can shift gears a little and look at the question of governance, which we've kind of spoken about and alluded to in terms of how things are run, when they run well and when they don't. Sean, what does good governance mean, and conversely, what does bad governance look like?
Look, good governance. Governance is when you talk about governance, it can be all shades of grey, but essentially good governance is a board, firstly, that come to solely serve with their board hat on, not their own interests. So that's step one, first principles. But secondly, the board set the culture, the risk appetite, and the speed limit for the business. And that's so important with a business to make sure it does endure. And a lot of businesses, as we were talking about earlier, do fail. A lot of startups fail. That's just part of life. But I think if you've got a board that have their antenna well up and they can anticipate the challenges coming and take good, good strategic actions and review that regularly, you're on your way to good governance. And culture is essential. Having cultural fit and culture led by the board down through your organisation is also the main thing that you'd be expecting a board to do from the top. Conversely, bad governance is obviously directors that sort of lost their way a little bit. They're not, they may not be contributing. The lines are a bit blurred within a cooperative. That can happen, especially grow our own cooperative. So, there's obviously ways to mediate that and remediate. Training is a huge thing you can do to avoid falling into these traps, either through BCCM and the courses they offer or an AICD. kind of combo. So, and also good delegations of authorities and understanding who's doing what in the organisation. Boards sometimes try and get operational, which is fine if it's agreed. But in a lot of situations, if you are lucky enough to have a CEO and other execs in the business or other managers, let them do the work and set the KPIs. So really there to set the speed limit and then allow your strategic plan to play out, and obviously check that regularly because it's not set in stone. Things do change, and COVID's a great example of that. But yeah, set the direction from the top, and in risk taking, don't be reckless. Be risk weighted with what you're doing, and make sure that what you're implementing as a business is well thought out and has business plans, etc., approved by the board. Usually have a high rate of success, in my opinion.
Stuart, in our chat earlier, you one of the interesting things, interesting points you made is that you rely on, within a relatively small team, a very wide range of expertise and experiences. Is that part of the clue towards honing in on good governance?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things with starting off a co-op and being a couple of years into its operation is, bringing a group of farmers together who are 1 minute running their own dairy business and the next minute collectively running a second business. That's quite a mind shift for those individuals, and I think it does take a bit of time to get everyone on the page, and you need good plans, you need good policies, you need a good foundation of understanding, you need good leadership. And I think one of the things we haven't mentioned tonight is selecting executives and management that understand the values of a co-op and the co-op structure. I think that's maybe sometimes the downfall with some of the co-ops that demutualise, that you have a CEO come in who's trying to run it as a corporate when they don't really appreciate and understand the co-op. So from our point of view, being small, it's understanding the plan. So making sure new directors and the directors understand those plans, the strategies, understanding their responsibilities as a director, because this, in our case, a lot of these people this is the first time they've ever been a director, and maybe even been on a committee. So, there's a real education piece there. I think it's important. I think this is a really mature thing that we've maybe it's occurred over a couple of years, but it's understanding when you don't have the skills and you're making a decision about something and you don't necessarily have the skill set to deal with it. So, as you said, like, we've been really lucky to have people, come out of the woodwork and want to help us. And Mark, who's on the meeting tonight, we've had many, quite a few chats with him as well. So, so I think it's knowing when you're short of the skills and getting support and help for that. I think a big part of it, no matter what business structure it is, the values and the culture that you embed and try to build and grow and base your decisions on, that they're really important as well. That's probably my view on the world.
Mark, you're in the dairy game, but obviously operating on a different scale to mountain milk. Is there more pressure to find good people for the skill set that Sean and Stuart have been talking about, and having found them, keep them in, for as long as you can, because obviously people tend to be pretty footloose these days, don't they?
Pete, it is a challenge. It's it's fascinating. I think the dairy industry, and I'm sure others are the same, does place a big emphasis on training leaders, emerging leaders. There are lots of programs. If you want to find them, Dairy Australia and other lead bodies will coax and coach people through. We have a program ourselves. We have a layer beneath the board we call the RACS, Ward Representative Advisory Council. Kind of grand, but that's meant to be a succession planning piece, so that younger farmers can become leaders in time. Do you know, the hardest thing in the skill set, though, really is that as farmers, they are inherently, their strong suit is farming. They may be on a hospital board locally, or they might be somewhere else, but do you know, effectively they're farmers. So for us, the independent director has always been a really important role. And if I just take another point, the whole notion of conflict of interest, if we were running a corporate board, we'd have to have the vast majority of our board sit out of the decisions they're making because they have an interest. So clearly that can't be the case. In fact, I've had someone to say to me, if you haven't got a conflict, you haven't got an interest. You know, you've got to be engaged. So it is very different and difficult to manage a group of farmers and really make sure that you have got a skill set that's making the right decisions. It is a challenge. In
your collective experience, do farmer co-ops, do they embrace outsiders? So are they prepared to maybe take on board the views and the leadership of people who haven't necessarily spent all their life milking cows or crushing grapes?
I'll take that on.
Yeah.
I'm an example. I've not been in the dairy industry. You know, the closest I can say I've been as I grew up in New Zealand. I went to, you know, an agricultural university. So dairy skills around the table weren't seen by the board as another skill set we needed. It was the commercial, it was managing big relationships and perhaps some other stuff. So our board saw the gap, if you like, and didn't employ someone from within. And we worked hard in finding out our latest independent director. You know, John has lots of agribusiness experience and lots of directorship experience, but not a huge amount of dairy experience. But I think too that brings a great strength and the ability to challenge.
Anybody else like to have a crack at that?
Yeah, I'd second that. I'm not from a farm. People think I am, and I have no problem with that. I've spent most of my life with growers, but I think a business needs a certain amount of experienced people who've been there, done that, and then you need people to bring in new skill sets. You know, a broader vision of, you know, and a broader world of what goes on sometimes, and that's what helps push a whole group forward, and eventually you can all move in the same direction with very varied backgrounds and experience. And I think that's a really nice thing in a co-op, when you can have people from a very diverse background all thinking the same and heading in the same way with a strategic plan. So in my experience, I've been welcome to our cooperative and the region, and people in the regional areas are particularly friendly, and I think they're very open-minded despite what other people might think. I think they embrace new ideas and new technology on a regular basis, and Australian farmers are amongst the most innovative I've seen around the world, and I've seen a lot of growers in different countries a lot more backwards. So I'd definitely argue that Australian growers are well open to ideas and people from the outside, such as myself.
Stuart, has Mountain Milk got room for outsiders?
Certainly. Yeah, just in our short experience, diversity around the board is important, right? So I think there's two forms of diversity. So there's skills, and then there's people and personalities and culture and so on. Just around our board table, I think we do have quite a diverse group of people directing the business. So I think that's been great, and that's really important. We've got different personalities sitting around the table, but I have actually been really pleasantly surprised how inviting the group has been of outside skills and people that have no dairy farming experience, and they've been really welcoming of advice, because they know they're out of this isn't their skills that they have, so we need some advice. So yeah, in a new startup co-op, it's been pretty impressive how welcoming the group's been around skills and getting advice.
Shifting gears just slightly, but to, I guess, one of the most fundamental things, it's often said we're only limited by our imagination and finance. Melina, capital raising is often a roadblock for farmers. Can cooperatives be a good vehicle for capital raising? And is this something that boards should be concentrating on?
Well, no amount of wish fulfillment is going to give you a sustainable business model. You're going to need operating capital. You're going to need investment capital, particularly if you're getting into something capital intensive like value adding. So absolutely, boards of cooperatives have to be as focused on access to capital as any other business, depending on what the business plan requires. Cooperatives can be a really good vehicle for capital raising. I mean, they are the original peer-to-peer lending group. They are a jointly owned company that brings together joint capital to enter an enterprise. Certain legislation has also made it easier for cooperatives to get the kind of capital that they have been restricted from getting in the past, and that's working capital. So they can get equity into the cooperative without losing control using these new instruments that are specifically for cooperatives. The main problem is that not enough people know how to do it, including cooperatives themselves. And we together as a cooperative sector working with government need to work on that. I mean, you can't find a lawyer or an accountant in Australia really now at the moment that knows about cooperative capital units because it's not taught as part of formal education in those fields. Government regulators don't know enough about cooperative capital. So we have some catching up to do, but it's not insurmountable.
Well, the big banks have obviously had a bit of a wake-up call through that Royal Commission. Are they more receptive to some creative capital raising? Are they tending to listen more? Because some of the most compelling evidence before the Royal Commission was really about the way farmers were treated or mistreated, and as a discrete lending class. Anybody like to offer a view about whether they've sensed a change in attitude among their lenders?
Yeah, well, look, not particularly with the membership base, but just I think COVID is actually giving a bit of an opportunity to agriculture here as the lowest risk use of finance at the moment for the big four or any other lender for that matter. So, you know, you look at retail, you look at, you know, other businesses, you know, hospitality. I think banks will be lending increasingly to agricultural-based businesses and co-ops. So I think that's actually a silver lining for all of this. Is actually ag is pretty safe compared to these other industries. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a win behind the sail at the moment, Pete.
Well, it certainly has been business as usual, hasn't it? And that was really the basis of the National Farmers Federation's Very Clever campaign very early in the lock-up, when, of course, people were falling over themselves to strip supermarket shelves. The NFF, which you might have seen, came out with a campaign saying, we've got enough food for everybody, we've got enough everything for everybody, even enough toilet paper for everybody, like, we've got your back kind of thing. And as a performing sector in the Australian economy, farming and food generally have just been chugging on.
Absolutely.
Now, look, in terms of the sharing, both of the wisdom and other things, we're going to wrap up getting to the in the home stretch, but we do have a very interesting question about sharing things, and this is a question that says, do co-ops share resources like water, and can they help manage impacts of drought and climate change? The dairy game's obviously very keen for water and irrigation and water rights and where it goes and how it goes. What's your experience, Stuart? Mark?
Yeah, we've kind of grappled with some of these things, not necessarily to do with water or drought, but you know, we've been looking together about how we could reduce our energy costs by investing in renewables. We've we've bought inputs like lime and fertilizer and seed and all sorts of stuff. So I think in our co-op there's an opportunity to do all of that. Water's critical. I suppose most of our farms here are rain-fed most of the time. So it's quite a reliable climate and seasonal rainfall here. So most of our farms are actually dryland farms. There isn't a lot of irrigation. So in terms of water, it hasn't been a big issue. But I think the underlying question is, if there's an opportunity to invest in some assets that underpin the performance of your businesses, your members and your co-op, we'd certainly look at it. It's and I think that's the opportunity we've got under the co-op banner is, if this makes sense for our members, let's have a crack. Let's investigate it.
Mark, are there strengths in being able to, in terms of your marketing, in terms of your provenance, to explain to customers that you are doing things a little more sustainably and a little bit more thoughtfully? And
yeah, Pete, look, it's interesting. We supply milk to Lion Dairy and Drinks these days, and in many ways, the big brands are the ones that are doing it hard. And it's perhaps the potential we see is to disaggregate again and break things down. Malanda milk for far north Queensland and so on. I think the value add story is there, and it's in some ways our scale and the big brand scale has become a negative in some ways.
And so Sean, in the driest,
small again.
Yeah, right. Sean, in the driest state, in one of the driest continents on Earth, water issues are always front of mind, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. In our strategic plan, we've actually got a particular focus on water. Our official policy is we just want our growers to use water as efficiently as possible, but we have rolled out information days. We actually find it's actually the information around water that's hardest to find. I've come from an economics and trading background in previous lives, and water is one of the most complicated markets I've ever seen. And I've traded options and futures and you name it. So for a grower to disseminate this is nearly impossible, especially because they're so time poor. So what we try to do is educate. So we have regular water wires, and as I said before, we've had Aether come out, PIRSA. And it's just understanding the actual rules around water trading. And we also put out non-biased advice about water and just the facts on the market. So it's not coming from a broker that might have a certain motivation on the information source. So we did consider actually buying water in bulk for our members, but that's also very tricky to do because if you're on the wrong side of the market, you could easily bankrupt your co-op. So you've got to find a way that's value add for your growers, but doesn't put your balance sheet at risk.
Look, if you do get a handle on it, I'm sure the Murray-Darling Basin Commission would appreciate some input, if not the state governments of Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia and Victoria. Look, we are pretty much into the home stretch now. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this roaming discussion. And I hope you have as well enjoyed it at home. Great questions. We really appreciate the engagement that we've had from you. Just to repeat, Cooperative Conversations is part of Cooperative Farming, a new online educational resource for farmers. For that, we need to thank BCCM for being the wind underneath our wings. We want to make sure that you stay tuned and stay engaged with our series, and that you tune in into our next interview series where we talk to Larry McHugh, who's the CEO of Marquee Macadamias Cooperative in northern New South Wales, and about how they have managed to rebrand and reinvent to become the world's largest macadamia processing company. Quite amazing. Followed by, once again, a roundtable like this, discussing the challenges and opportunities for value-adding Australian produce, including meat, dairy, seafood, fruit and nuts, with a veritable who's who of agribusiness names. That's all about maximising your produce and adding value. That's on 6:30 p.m. next Wednesday night. You can get all the information by going to the relevant website. Go to conversations.coopfarming.coop. And remember, all these events, all these programs are available both now and on demand. I would really like to thank you all for joining us once more, and seeing as though it is the 1st of July and I'm going dry for this month, I want to toast you with some very clean Queensland water. So thank you very much for your involvement tonight. I'm sure most of you will duck off and have a glass of milk at this point, but it is water. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you next time.